Okay, looks like we're live. Uh, Thanks to everybody who's watching on the channel Jerb the Humanist. And as a reminder, I do upload the audio from these Hangouts onto a podcast stream, Jerb the Humanist. I don't do that for my video essays, but I should remind people that I do this for the Hangouts. And tonight I have a guest that I'm happy to talk to again. It's someone I admire. It's Ryan Bell, and I'm happy to have him on tonight. Ryan is the National Organizing Manager at the Secular Student Alliance. He is the founder and senior consultant at Life After God and is currently the humanist chaplain at the University of Southern California. I got it right this time, Southern California. So how's it going, Ryan? How are you doing tonight?
Doing well, doing well. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me on. It's fun. I've actually only, I guess you reminded me that we chatted once before on a podcast, but it's mostly on Twitter that I see you and hear you.
Yeah. No, we are Twitter buddies, and you know, combating the classical liberals, as it
Yeah.
were, for the
It's so
most
much
part.
fun at times, and then it can be super unfun.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you got to get those validation points for complete strangers somewhere. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
my well-being requires a certain amount of virtue signaling that I have to do every day. So I just go
Yeah.
on Twitter and pretend to be this really empathetic person, and
Mhm.
I say all the right left-wing things, and I get rewarded with
Mhm.
likes from my
Yeah,
thought
I
process.
yeah, I know I'm only doing it so I get laid with feminists.
That's
So
it. Yeah, that's
yeah.
basically.
Um, I'll let you know when it starts working. I haven't hit the formula for getting laid with feminists on a regular basis, but
Yeah.
I'll keep you posted. So the reason I did want to talk to you, obviously, well, first off, we are broadcasting this the night before the 2018 midterms. That's kind of nerve wracking. We're both kind of nervous about it. And
Same.
we both share like an intense fear of the Republicans, and almost matched by a very low level of confidence in the Democrats to do anything, even if they get elected tomorrow. So
If only good
that's
intentions were enough to make the world a good place.
yeah, absolutely. And I did want to talk to you because you are the humanist chaplain at University of Southern California. Got it right again. And you have a history of organizing religious communities, and you have a history of sticking out your neck for the goals of social progress. And I did want to talk to you about like maybe um, some of our concerns about, you know, organizing people maybe under humanism or non-belief, or maybe giving up on that goal altogether, but you know, just um, the merits of organizing community for social progress. And I really do want to start out um, asking about how it is being a humanist chaplain. Like what's it like leading your community of students, and what's it like founding, like like being a chaplain, being sort of a source of like moral leadership and inspiration um, in a field, or like a philosophy that's not usually associated with, you know, strong, you know, moral foundations like non-belief. I know humanism is separate from non-belief, but you know, um, in other religious communities, like maybe your past religious communities, you might have drawn your inspiration from uh, what you thought God would have wanted you to do, or Scripture. But how is leading fellow humanist students, and how does that maybe compare with your past experiences of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. And I certainly, I mean, I'm trying to figure it out myself. So I've been at USC for a little over a year now, and it's taken me about that long to sort of get my way into the university community there. I'm only there for part of 1 day a week, usually, sometimes 2 days a week, depending on what activities are happening. So I'm not there on a regular basis, like with an office that I'm in every day. So a lot of it is just popping in and seeing the students. We have lunch together, as many of us as are available on Wednesday afternoon, and then I just sort of hang out in the University Religious Center. At USC, all the chaplains come underneath the Office of Religious Life, and I'm the only. Well, I should say that the dean of religious life at USC is a Hindu, pretty secular Hindu, and a guy named Varun Soni, who I've had on my podcast, really great guy. And then the senior associate dean is a man named Jim Burklow, who's a very progressive Christian, the best kind of Christian you could imagine as an ally. And the new sort of junior associate dean is Vanessa Gomez Brake, who is a humanist, a non-religious atheist, but really identifies as a humanist. So one of the paid staff of the Office of Religious Life, one of the associate deans, is a humanist, and she invited me to come, and I'm a volunteer there. So my full-time job with the Secular Student Alliance keeps me pretty busy. And then I come down and visit with the students once a week. And I guess the only thing I can tell you is sort of practically how it's working out. And that is that I see the students and we chat, we hang out, I talk to them about what's on their mind. We have twice a month, we have a dinner, which is sort of an open invitation to anyone that wants to come and hang out. And at that dinner, either Vanessa or myself usually has a short thought that we'll sort of share, like a little homily almost, having something to do with humanist values or something that's taken place on campus that we need to process, or something that's going on in our society that we want to sort of talk about and process together. But it's much less about, I guess I'm still working out in my own thinking and in my own belief or value system, how much it's really leadership, like how much I really even think of myself as leading them at all, anywhere particular. It's really facilitative in its in the way it comes about, I think.
And would you say your work at the Secular Student Alliance is maybe leadership in more so?
Yeah, that feels a bit more like leadership. But even there, the groups have, maximal autonomy to do basically what they feel motivated and called to do. And we are in a place of sort of suggesting, like we have broad parameters of values that we ask our students to sort of sign on to and adhere to. So that if we had a secular group that was like, went full Jordan Peterson, kind of misogyny type of thing, we would say, no, we can't go there. So we have like, I would say broad boundaries outside of which we would not encourage students to work with us, or which we would even perhaps at some point disaffiliate with that student group. But within that, students decide whether they're going to focus more on science education, literacy on their campus, or debating religious people and really making it about atheism and about normalizing atheist students on campus, which in some parts of the country is still an important goal that a lot of our students have. Or like at USC, where it's really about community, a sense of belonging. And so I've started thinking in terms of communities of meaning and belonging. I mean, meaning and practice. So looking down the road, the way I'm sort of conceptualizing these communities is that as atheism becomes more normal, as more and more people identify as non-religious, even if not atheist, at least non-religious, that communities are going to need to adapt to that world. And one of the things I think that means is that um, instead of orienting around a sort of an ontology that includes a divine being, a sort of a morality of divine command, that we're going to need to help people think through values and ethics and morality in a different way. And essentially, what that boils down to for me is helping people find a meaningful, a life of significance, and what's a life of significance means for them, and then how to practice that in the world. I think we do, all of us, a lot of talking about our beliefs and our values, and I think sort of this sort of Jewish part of me that's still, I'm not Jewish, to be clear, but from my theological training, this sense of um, that I have, that we know more about what people believe by what they do than what they say they believe. So
Hmm.
you can say you believe any number of things, but to me, it's more interesting to know what you're doing with your time and your energy and your influence, and that tells me more about your belief system. And so I think having spaces and communities where people can talk about what they believe and then practice it and kind of see how it works out, and what modifications they might make. I think we need to give sort of space for people to try on different ways of living out their values in the world, and revising and growing and maturing.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way you describe um, I guess the hierarchy of both those organizations, because it seems fairly self-determined, and uh, I think that's a good value to live out, and something that's, maybe a little more humanistic, though that's debatable with everything, um, as you might imagine, for non-believers, because I think we both came into non-belief at a time when the community was really starting to fracture,
Mm-hmm.
if it hasn't already entirely fractured already. And obviously, there's endless debates about, well, just because you don't believe in God doesn't mean you're a progressive person, or you're a liberal or a leftist or whatever. And those debates have always been, they've been boring to me for a very long time, because it's less about, now that you don't believe in God, um, you should believe in these values, and more like, you always should have believed in these values. It's just that now you have less reason to eschew them, because you've found that that old religious structure doesn't apply, or something. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that there is the sort of the meme within atheism that atheists don't gather. I mean, it's one of the first things where atheists don't join; they're not joiners, and it was one of the first things I heard from atheists when I did my little year without God experiment, um, and I said explicitly that I wanted to visit communities of atheists to see kind of what it was like. And people said, "Oh, there's no such thing. Atheists don't gather." But I immediately found all these gatherings of atheists. So I was like, well, evidently they do gather. Like
yeah.
I see them gathering right in front of me. But I do think there is a strain of people that have been subject to groupthink, heavy amounts of groupthink within religion, and are just very turned off by any group that says, this is what we stand for. Please join us and stand with us for this, whatever it is. Um,
Hmm.
they probably tend to not want to vote along party lines. They probably don't want to, pay dues to anyone or join any cause. And they really are kind of lone rangers. And we have to give room for those people, obviously, to
Hmm.
live their life. I'm not saying that every person, and to be frank, I've not even found a community that I feel super fulfilled being a part of, or that I feel super motivated to like get up on Sunday morning and go and hang out with.
Hmm. Yeah, I think my local UU church might be headed in that direction, though sometimes sometimes they're a little too open-minded, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that
But
tends to be the UU thing. I mean, it's
yeah,
very like, oh, sure, like if you want to pray to angels or something, like that's
yeah.
welcome too.
But I mean, I can't really say the local one in Boulder is bad because they're currently sheltering a somebody seeking what is it, sanctuary, so
Oh, right, yeah,
they're,
yeah,
yeah, they're doing good work. So like I like it's more like a loving hug on the back and thinking, okay, you're a little nutty, but you're one of the better ones. So
yeah. Well, we're all a little nutty. Maybe we have to like
yeah.
prioritize the nuts.
Oh yeah. I mean, I if you see my Twitter feed, you know the nutty things I put out there. Um, and if you think anything I say is nutty, I don't blame you. But we do seem to agree. So my impression of I brought up how fractured uh, atheism and even to a large extent humanism is. Um, my impression is that there are different organizations and groups and communities um, under this broad umbrella, but they have different focuses. And like there are organizations like FFRF which do like really good work in one specific area, and I think they do a good job meeting certain needs.
Hmm.
And but those needs don't necessarily translate to another organization. And like I know a lot of there were alliances in the American humanist community. They're still associated with that, fighting for social justice issues.
Right.
And my impression of the Secular Student Alliance is, and this may be unfounded, but they're generally more on that social justice oriented end, and that they are concerned about bringing in more marginalized groups into non-belief and like helping them have a shared community when their other ones have been abandoned. Has that been your experience at all?
Yeah, no, I do think that that is true. I've been here just over a year, and it's, the previous leadership definitely had been steering the organization in that direction. And we get no small amount of pushback from, supporters, but also don't students, if it gets too social justicey for people. But for they'll say, and I can't really fault them, that social justice doesn't necessarily follow from secularism. And I get that. I get that secularism, really pure, if we can think of pure secularism, is simply religion. I mean, government devoid of religious involvement. Government that is secular, government that is not like a Taliban kind of thing, where the government is religious in and of itself. And that's a value worth having. I think, government free from religious control is a value worth fighting for in and of itself, without any other social justice stuff layered on top of it. However, I think of SSA um, as uh, a youth development organization. In a way, it's more than just activism. We're actually thinking of ourselves as participating in, it's so funny, these phrases that come to mind are left over from my Christian background, but I think of like character development, or like moral development. And students that are in the high school and college years are, that's the time in our lives when we're really concentrated on moral and ethical and philosophical questions, not only because we're on campus, but just because we're that age when we're differentiating from our parents, we're figuring out what we think about literally everything. And so as a youth development or young adult development organization, we are interested in how, or at least I and our staff here are very interested in how we are part of a matrix of influences in young adult lives to help them sort through their values. And family is a big part of that. The school that they're at, of course, and the courses that they're taking, and their own reading and all of that is a big part of that. But we think as a sort of a secondary source of influence that I want to be part of helping folks draw a line between secularism and issues of equality and justice and peace. And I agree that we don't have to, like, the line from outwards from secularism doesn't necessarily go to social justice, but it certainly can. It's
Mhm.
certainly not prohibited. You could go from secularism to a kind of totalitarianism, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's been done in the past, as we know. So, but you can also draw a clear line from secularism to anti-racism, for example,
Mhm.
and it's not difficult to figure that out. And so we want to be a part of not being dogmatic about that necessarily. Students obviously are free to affiliate however they choose, but to make it clear that that is a path that can be taken and that
Yeah.
we advocate for that path.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of value you can get out of religious communities that for a long time even I would have not given much credence to as like a newly minted atheist, like you know uh because you know f there are arguments along the all across the internet about like why you should be religious, and a lot of them are it gives you a sense of community, it gives you a sense of meaning, it the rituals are good for you, and it's very easy to go knee jerk and say, well, you can get all those things from other places. You can a baseball game's a ritual. You can go to a baseball game.
Sure.
You can get a sense of community out of your local underwater basket weaving club, or if you're in Boulder, rock climbing like
Right.
groups or something like that.
CrossFit, right?
Um,
Talking about how CrossFit is like a
yeah,
religion.
right. But and I think those are actually valid. Like you can get a sense of community, um, and meaning out of those like things that are completely a-religious. But there is something to forming groups out of people seeking common moral ground with other like-minded individuals,
Yeah.
and uh, I think it's really important for non-believers to have sort of a landing place for that. And so like we're talking about how fractured uh non-belief is, and it is very fractured, and for a while I thought there's really like after the 2016 election I felt there was really no point in organizing under like humanism further, but later on like a few things might have changed my perspective, and I'll share one of them with you. Was after Charlottesville, in Denver, there was a march from a local park with an MLK statue to the Denver Capitol building. And before the march, there were multiple pastors preaching, sometimes invoking spiritual concepts, but never so much that I felt like saturated. And of course, it was for a very somber cause, being there was a neo-Nazi rally the previous day across the country, and
Mhm.
white supremacy very much was still alive. And I'm looking around and I see a ton of churches and like church members, people with church shirts on, um, and like banners um, representing churches against white supremacy, white nationalism. And I'm like, if nothing else, these communities founded on moral progress seem at least like a very good way of organizing, at least on a community level. And it would like, I didn't, there's no way to distinguish an atheist from a Christian just by looking at them. But looking around, there weren't any people wearing like something from the local atheist group in Denver or in Boulder. There might have been, but at the same time, the local atheist group didn't say anything about Charlottesville that weekend, and I'm just thinking, it would be really nice if there were more people organizing in my area of the tent for this moral principle, and it seems a shame that we can't get our shit together to at least condemn Nazis. So I don't know, that's how I felt. And I don't know how you feel about that, but it seems like there is at least some justification for wanting to organize people who may not have a strong spiritual belief, but at least a strong moral foundation that you might find in your typical churchgoer or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this fracturing that you talk about, and I definitely sort of came into my own atheist identity around that time, 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm learning now is that so much happened before I got here,
right,
that is not widely available on the internet to read, So just in talking to people.
I came in right after Atheism Plus blew over, like right after. Yeah. So I found
that is like, good intentions, maybe not maybe the best execution, or I don't know that. I think it's harder to draw those connections from atheism than it is from humanism, personally. And I'm not married to the notion of humanism, even if there were something better to call it or to be a part of. But I feel like, the Christian martyr, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, if folks aren't familiar with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was a part of the German resistance in Germany. Actually had come to New York to do a extended guest professorship at Union Theological Seminary, and at the peak of the war, willingly went back to Nazi Germany to stand with his, in the Christian resistance. And as a pacifist, all during his academic career, everything we know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer was that he was a pacifist. Signs up for this underground movement to assassinate Adolf Hitler, and they carried out one attempt and failed, as we know. Like, all these attempts on Hitler's life, mysteriously fail. Like, it's just amazing how many near misses there were. And he was imprisoned and later executed by firing squad for his treason, as it were, to kill Hitler. And he wrote a book, really fascinating book, that I've always wanted to go back and read now that I'm not religious, about community. And one of the things he says there is that community for its own sake is really hollow. Like, it's not. A lot of times when I hear people talk about forming, like, we want a sense of community, want to form community, and it seems like this elusive thing, sort of like happiness, that as you try to pursue happiness, you just find yourself more and more unhappy, or it just like slips through your fingers or slides around the next corner, like you can never quite catch up to it. And to me, what I've said, both when I was a pastor and since, in talking to some secular groups, including Sunday assemblies in various places, is that community happens when we have this sense that our futures are bound up together, or that our well-being is bound up together, and that I literally need you in my life to keep me sane, to help me be a better version of myself. And especially, and you'll understand this, as as for me, as a straight white man who's cis and privileged in literally every possible way. I could be wealthier than I am, just saying, but I could own property. That's the only box I can tick, you know, that maybe I don't tick, but it doesn't really count because I have every other privilege. In order for me to see our contemporary situation accurately, I need other people in my life pointing out the blind spots that I have. And we all do that. We all need, you know, people in our lives to help us see the blind spots and be together in pursuit of something, something better. And one of the things that I lost as and almost, you know, I would say probably most people would agree, as a person who goes from being a Christian to being a non-Christian, one of the things you lose is the sort of the teleology of your life. So of theology or philosophy. So there's this profound sense as a Christian that life, or that the arc of the universe, as King said, is bending towards justice. And one of the saddest moments in my deconversion was to realize that there was no arc, that all bets are off, that probably this ends badly, you know, and there's a real moment of like deep despair that comes over you when that hits you first. And it's been a constant struggle the last 5 years, actually, for me to figure out, okay, is it fair? I mean, I feel like as human beings, we need something to pursue. We need an objective. And even if we don't know that it's going to work out well. So to me, this community that we keep talking about and the organizing that I wish to see has to be around something that's worth giving your life for, like something really worth, if not dying for, at least living for. And that for me would be one of the other expression that we used to use as a Christian was the idea that we're sharing life together. That's a kind of a little cheesy slogan that Christians say. But it carries some value for me. Like, I feel like I don't want to just go to a meeting where some songs are sung and a talk is given and we have tea and crumpets afterwards. Like I want to feel like I'm in community with people who I don't know if I would survive without them, kind of thing, you know? And I think
we need like a central project of worth or something.
Yeah, something where, and again, I think it's, you know, I mean, we have to be careful not to always be in search of an enemy, like, you know, in terms of enemies uniting people. And right now, I think we do have a clear and present danger staring us in the face, which, as you said, at least we could be, you know, opposed to Nazis. You know, that seems like a pretty low bar. But as low as we tend to think that bar is, I interact almost daily with people on the internet who are saying, oh, there's no real Nazis, you're exaggerating, you're being hysterical. And then I'm the kind of person who, in spite of what I may say on Twitter, actually sits back and thinks, God, am I being hysterical? Maybe I'm being hysterical. Like, maybe this isn't nearly as bad as I think it is. And then I go back and read some more and I'm like, oh, no, it's as bad as I think it is, maybe worse. And then someone will say, oh, come on, you know, the world's, you know, we have our favorite villain who wants us to believe that everything just keeps getting better and better and better. And I think, well, maybe it is, you know, and maybe I'm being unreasonable. And then, anyway, I go back and forth, but I do think it does do something for us to have a common cause. And I think there are plenty of choices available. And I think if there's not a God to save us, then we need to work to preserve the environment. If there's not a dictator, like a God figure, to tell us that we have to be fair and equitable with people, then as humans, we should learn to be fair and equitable with people, because we want the most people to experience the best possible version of life that they can. And all of those things are worth fighting for. And I think we could, if we were less concerned about bringing everyone with us, we could just say, look, we are the humanists that care about social justice. Full stop. You don't want to care about social justice? That's great. Go form your own group that's, you know, that's in favor of social injustice and knock yourselves out. But
go join the IDW.
Yeah, and then be less. Do you think the IDW gives a shit what you and I think about them? They don't. They just do their thing.
Well, I think they care to the extent that they can market off of us. So,
yeah. Right. But I just think we care far too much about unity in the movement, whatever the hell that means. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think unity is. I heard I was at California Free Thought Day, and Coven Synapathy was there. She was fantastic. I'd never met her before, um, and she pointed out how calls for unity are often, probably not always, but very often, a tool to shut down dissent from the margins.
Mm-hmm.
And can't we all just get along? You know, we know the whole Rodney King. Like, why can't we all just get along? And I think it's, if it's unity at the expense of justice, then I'm really not interested in that kind of unity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to be more comfortable just saying, okay, you go your way, I'll go my way.
Fucking regressive. Um,
I know.
but you know, I'm certainly far beyond the point where I think we can unite atheists. I think I think there was sort of a sense of a project of worth maybe in 2014 or 2015. And I think the idea, and this obviously didn't apply to everyone, but I think everybody more or less had the same, you know, vision. Like, look at all the harm religion does, and it makes people unreasonable. Um, what we should do is, you know, make everyone see reason and think critically, and being reasonable and thinking critically um, are certainly values that I hold, and I think everybody should.
Right.
If the whole world was more reasonable and more thinking critically, I would not complain. Um, but I think on another level, I think everybody had a different idea of what that meant. Kind of what you were talking about with the vagueness of what community means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there's also a sense of vagueness in the term humanism as well. It's almost like, uh, or at least secular humanism, I'll say, like it means being a good person. Like, what does that even mean? Like, that's not really, and that's not necessarily the definition of humanism, but like sometimes it gets thrown around in a vague manner like that, and you
Mm-hmm.
can sort of see a clash of ideas of what it means to be a good person. Like, even on the outside looking in, I've seen people at the AHA conference. It's a lot of the time it tended to be a lot of wealthy atheists who can blow a ton of money on a non-religious organization, and then they feel like they're being lectured down to by justice advocates, some of whom are like my online friends, um, and they feel like they're just disrupting everything when they're actually pushing the humanist community to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if, I mean, maybe that resonates with you, maybe it doesn't, but I I do feel it's a little vague. But at the same time, you and I both know the numbers. We know that the nuns is the most rapidly growing religious group in America right now.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to stop anytime soon. And um, at if if the world is going to shift in that direction, you know, we have our current country is being run by theocrats who are able to take advantage of the organizing values or the capacity for religious communities to get out the vote, you know, put out propaganda, stump for Republican senators. And it would be nice if that nuns category is going to increase, like build more coalitions, or at least, you know, organizing principles that, you know, uh, um, are at least founded on common shared moral ground and on projects that can counteract that better, even as people lose that sense of teleology. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but you
Yeah,
know.
it does, and I feel the vagueness too. And it's frustrating to me every time humanism comes up, and people say, well, nobody knows what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a couple of reactions to that. My first one is, well, nobody's going to know what it means unless we create meaning around it,
Mm-hmm.
So, and if it remains this vague thing, then no one is going to know what it means.
And I think we should add, sorry to interrupt,
No,
but like any religious or even maybe philosophical group will have factions in it that have a different idea of what it means to be a Protestant or what it means to be a Muslim. So like
leftists,
it's,
for God's sake, like
yeah, I know.
you can't get,
Yeah.
there's like minor fractions, within socialism that unless you're a student of history pretty thoroughly, you wouldn't even know. We
Mm-hmm.
know the Jacobins from the Trotskyites from the you know
Mm-hmm.
the Bolsheviks of various different traditions and values. So there's always these fractions. I think that organized atheism and humanism also suffers from the sort of classic nonprofit disease of the tail wagging the dog in a way, or like the donation dollars dictating the program of the nonprofit. And I think because we still have a ways to go in terms of fighting back this Christofascism that you referred to a second ago, and that donor dollars really flow towards political, or not political so much, but like legal battles um, in the United States. And fair enough, right? I mean, I think we see encroachments, like re-encroachments, places that we thought were held by secularism are giving ground again now to this Trump Republican effort to not really be Christian, but just to, in a very deeply crass and cynical way, use some thin veneer of Christianity to advance their, fascist propaganda. And so there's plenty to fight against in that realm. Um, and so it can feel a little, um, even to me, a little um, like playing the violin on the deck of the Titanic. It's like, let's
Mm-hmm.
sing some songs together, as the Titanic sinks. Let's have community. Let's just, feel good about our existence as human beings and sort of revel in the beauty of existence and nature and all of which is awesome. But it's sort of like that meme of the guy drinking coffee and everything is fine, and there's like this fire like
Yeah.
blazing around him. I mean, it's like, this is fine, and I'm like, this is so real, like this is where so much of our energy I think needs to go. And um, every day, I come to work and I'm excited to work with students. I'm excited to work on and to see them grow as people and develop. And they do some really interesting projects, and even some social justice stuff that they work on is very inspiring. Um, but it's hard to not be distracted by the fact that, in my view, our country is going down a very dangerous path, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't know if that path will be momentarily interrupted tomorrow or whether it's full steam ahead. We don't know yet, but
Mm-hmm.
it's there's a lot on the line right now, and I feel like the potential to organize has never been greater. I mean, I think you see that in the growth of the DSA membership around the U.S., the election of minority candidates, even leftist candidates in some cases in local regional elections. So there is some sign that there's a resistance afoot more than just hashtag resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's encouraging, but I do think that there's a kind of blasé feel about humanism sometimes that makes people want to write it off. There's kind of a hard edge to atheism that's appealing to people, kind of a badassery maybe to being to like leading with that atheism, because we know it like pisses people off, or like the
Yeah.
Church of Satan or something like that, which is very provocative. And it's like this softer, gentler thing that humanism so often tries to do is maybe a little mealy mouthed to people, including me. So I'm really interested in trying to articulate, totally aside from what I do at USC and SSA, um, trying to articulate what I would think of as like a radical humanism. And
Hmm.
I'm reluctant to add the adjective because then it sort of implies that there's like a non-radical humanism, or that there's this pablum humanism that you can also have. But
Hmm.
I don't know how to set it apart from what people typically expect. And there is a slight tradition of radical humanism. So
Well, you have Sartre, who was in the Resistance, um, and who else? W.E.B. Du Bois. Du
yeah,
Bois. So
it is Du
those,
Bois. I think that's typically Du Bois. Yeah.
yeah, those are my go-tos. Maybe I'm cherry picking, and I'm hardly history literate. Oh, well,
I
I'll
think
I'll just
Debs is
I'll.
another good example. Eugene Debs in the
Mhm,
United States, who was imprisoned for being against the war and articulating an anti-war view, and
mhm,
they arrested him, I think, on charges of sedition or something like that, and he ran for president from prison. It was pretty awesome, and was
ooh,
a non-theist and humanist. There's also a Hindu, a stream of Hindu secularism and radical humanism that I wasn't aware of until recently. So yeah, I think humanism that takes human and beyond human. I mean, the part of the problem with humanism is that it almost implies that the non-human life on Earth isn't somehow as important. Um,
mhm,
but but I think we can articulate a humanism that includes the non-human life, animals, plants, the whole environment.
mhm,
That takes a radical stance on that. That says this is all we have, and it's like precious in and of itself, full stop, without any you know, needing any antecedent, type of purpose or cause, and we can fight to preserve, equal human rights and environmental justice and all the rest. I think it
mhm,
includes, and here's where I'm, not living up to my own convictions. I mean, I think a radical humanism includes at least vegetarianism, if not veganism. I mean, I think this is a commitment to like radical humanism that says, if animals are in any sense sentient in the way that we now understand many of them are, or maybe all of them, I'm not an expert. We probably shouldn't be housing them in these unjust conditions and then slaughtering them for food. It's probably something that in 20 years' time we'll look back and be super embarrassed that we participated
mhm.
in that.
Yeah, along with destroying the planet too. We'll be like, well, we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah,
So,
that was a bad idea. Yeah, we should have been content with less. How come nobody ever thought of that?
um, and unfortunately, there is you know there is an eschewing of the term radical, not only among the population at large, but particularly in skeptical communities, because skepticism, uh, while I think it is founded in good values of valuing science and critical thinking. If the world was more skeptical tomorrow, I'd be happier.
Hmm.
But you know, it's also because of that being laid back, and there's a reactionary nature to skepticism. It's almost like an overcorrection in some sense. So I don't think, among a lot of humanists, the term radical is a dirty word, and we should always eschew that. So,
Well, say more about that because I'm actually really interested in why that's true.
I mean, I think skepticism is a value worth holding,
Sure.
um, but it tends to get mixed in with scientism,
Mhm.
and this is also something I wanted to talk to you about before. There's a sense of not just like the political libertarianism, but like a very philosophical libertarianism,
Hmm. Hmm.
separate from like um, separate from like left libertarian anarchism, but just like the radical individualism,
Oh,
such that if we're going to accept the fact that our own biases um, interfere with our perception of the world and how everything works, um, even the radical individualists still won't take the time to hear out viewpoints and perspectives from marginalized communities and other demographics that we don't normally hear from.
hmm.
And um, because of that, they don't see the evidence of racism or sexism, but like um,
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, what I'm not quite getting is why humanists would be nervous about the word radical because it's associated with skepticism.
no, radical, sorry if I misspoke. I don't think the term radical is associated with skepticism. I think um when we're talking about all these fractured camps, um it's not so much like separate individual discrete
Right,
groups,
right,
but
right.
there's like a lot of overlap. So, at the AHA, you do have people I look up to speaking. There was a great speech I shared on Facebook the other day. I forgot who spoke, but um, like Ashton Woods, things like that. And then you do have this group of people who are maybe like individualist libertarians who
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily accept that, and they claim that racism has gone away,
Right.
all those other things, but mostly because they don't see the evidence of it. And really, I think it's more of a reaction, like because I think radical in this radical individualist view, um, you know, to learn about the everyday experiences of some marginalized groups and to learn that those things occur daily actually is a radical shift in how they perceive the world. And skepticism as a philosophy generally advises against uh, large shifts in like
Mm.
previous belief, if that makes sense. Like you're not supposed to.
That makes me want to talk even more about radical humanism. What you're saying,
Yeah.
you want to just really like up the ante.
That's possible. You're the problem with you're the problem that we can't get along these days. So
Right,
yeah.
right, right,
I
right.
mean,
Well, it is.
no,
I do run into this a lot, though. People who are saying essentially that um, I had this guy on Facebook that was always on my timeline, on my Facebook comments for the longest time, who basically was saying context doesn't matter in truth claims. There's so I on the one hand, I see like from a scientific point of view, if I want to know the atomic mass of plutonium or something like that,
mhm,
I mean, well, no, I take it back. Even there, context matters, right? Like, it's in any scientific experiment, the context of that experiment is important.
mhm,
I guess what these people are trying to say is that blue is blue, whether you're an African American or a white person or
mhm,
Nicaraguan or whatever you are. Blue is still blue.
mhm.
Which again, I'm thinking is probably a bad example because they're colorblind people, and you
Well, I
know,
think a lot of linguists would disagree with you too.
sure, yeah,
There's what is I forgot the hypothesis. There's some
or
model
like
that
math, like 1 + 1 is 2, doesn't
yeah,
matter who you are.
yeah,
And but then it's applied to social situations where
mhm,
um, like the fact that a public speaker is a woman, would carry a certain kind of difference than if it was a man, or like that we want more diversity in the makeup of our organizations, that
mhm,
that this is a um, the premise of that is off, and that we don't necessarily, I mean, all things being equal, sure, we wouldn't mind having diverse people, but that's not like a goal worth seeking, because all we really want is separation of church and state. Doesn't matter who's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just this blindness to difference, or unwillingness to see how people's identity actually does impact the everything. Like, it impacts their life, it impacts the lives of people that they're interacting with, and and it's not so much, I mean, what I have such a hard time communicating with people is that it's not like, I'm not interested in necessarily like maximizing difference in such a way that it creates deeper division, but people's willingness, especially white people's willingness to acknowledge and like own that difference and step into a relationship or a conversation with a full awareness, or at least as full as possible, given that person's experience, an awareness of where they are in the social matrix,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems like people want to stubbornly just ignore that, or say it doesn't exist, or that it doesn't matter, and that people that are trying to censor that are being divisive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the problem with that is, and it's not necessarily their fault, though. I don't tend to blame people ultimately, but we don't really talk about having a good sense of, how people in powerful positions can adjust things to suit their own needs,
Mm.
and by denying certain groups, you know, positions of power, or even having power structures in the first place, um, you do make it less friendly or less accessible or less accountable to certain people.
Or even just less true. Like, even like you're dealing with a piece of the whole reality
Mhm.
of whatever it is you're talking about. It's like, it's impoverished. It's an
Yeah.
impoverished discourse, because you're limited by a very narrow slice of human experience.
Yeah. And we're getting super postmodern. Well, not super, but like postmodern enough that it'll give James Lindsay a heart attack. We are closing in on an hour, but I will say, one of the things that made a lot of sense to me was another secular friend, and she noted that, even though she doesn't think like organizing around humanism um, maybe like the ultimate project of worth towards a brighter future.
Mm.
Um, on some level, there's still this community that exists right here, and we know each other, we know other podcasters, we know a lot of um, you know uh, everyday people who aren't leaders, but are genuinely uh, interested in joining communities and actually doing work and getting involved, against racism, sexism, and Nazis. We do have this group of people that at least knows each other and is connected with each other, and at the very least, it might be valuable to make sure we're all holding each other accountable. And if we can't, um, if we can't even within our own circles um, make each other better, then like the whole human project it might be a lost cause altogether anyway. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love that, and I think I love that idea, and I've often felt while I'm on Twitter or Facebook, thinking like, I'd love, not a conference, but I would love to like have like a camping trip
Mhm.
where like all the people, of course, this is my selfish wish, and it's very like me centric, but all the people that I love talking to, that I feel like share my values, we could all just go like hang out and camp and like talk and drink whiskey and do whatever we
Mhm.
do. And and I just think that um, it would be, because what I see is that the right always gets better organized. you know, you have this intellectual dark web, right? Whatever that means. And these people hold gatherings that sell $500 tickets by the thousands, and it's essentially like sophomoric, you know, kind of silliness to a large degree. And people are buying tickets for this and being radicalized, if we can use that term again, in the wrong, in my view, the wrong direction. And I'm thinking, why can't people like, uh, you know, people like Callie or Gretchen or, you know, Stephanie and Manette, or like, why can't we get this group of people and really say, like, we here we stand.
Mm-hmm.
This is the vision of a better future that we have for ourselves, as individuals, for our communities, for our friendships. This is the better way. And this is the problem with Democrats too. They can't be, you know, Democrats can't win by being not Trump. You know, they have to have a
Mm-hmm.
vision of something, a plan, some kind of beauty or attraction that calls people forward into, like, you know, we'll all have healthcare and we'll all have, you know, jobs that don't like destroy our humanity, that we can actually participate in the economic system that we're a part of. And this kind of vision of a future that's beautiful and egalitarian and life giving. I just feel like we should be able to get people together in some sense and articulate that for the world. Because, like you say, if we can't do that, then we're all just stuck in our bedrooms, like crying as we watch election returns.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I'm happy to sign off on that whole thing right there. Maybe when I put this in a podcast format, I'll put some inspiring music, or at least maybe like the USSR Soviet anthem under it, just for the
Yeah, exactly. Some yes, yes.
just for the edgy memery. So, but I said I'd keep you for an hour, and it's an hour. And I think you that ended on a good note. Hopefully tomorrow's elections go better. Um, are you still doing your podcast? I looked and you haven't updated since like May or something.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I am working on some new episodes. I'm in conversation with some guests, and I will be getting my podcast back up and going at the top of the year. So I'm looking forward to that.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it too, because I do listen to that one
Oh,
among my plethora of too many podcasts. So good luck with that one. Is there anything else you want to plug? Twitter handle, anything else?
yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at your own peril. It's at Ryan J Bell, and my Life After God stuff, which as you noted has been a bit on hiatus, is at lifeaftergod.org, and my Twitter for that is at our Life After God. So yeah, follow me on Twitter at Ryan J Bell, and let's be friends.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you for
Have a
having
good night, and hope the rest of the week goes well for all of us. But
me too. Me too.
yeah, and say hi to Marissa for me.
I will. Yeah, she's on deck.
All right. Well, all right.